In this video, we step into the dark world of Matthew Byrne and Bo Devlin, two names that had turned London's glittering Hatton Garden into a laundry for dirty money and flooded the UK with £190 million worth of cocaine. Byrne, a 44-year-old schemer from Sevenoaks, Kent, wasn't the type you'd spot in a back-alley brawl. He had the cool, calculated air of a man who planned every move. Devlin, a 33-year-old East London street soldier, carried the grit of the concrete jungle in his bones, a lad who'd cut his teeth on the rough edges of survival. Together, they didn't just play the game, they clawed their way to the top with fists full of cash and coke. From smuggling multi-ton shipments of South American coke hidden in banana crates to washing their cash through gold bars and designer watches, these two had built an empire that outwitted the law at every turn. They tangled with gun runners, South American kingpins, and a jeweler who turned diamonds into a front for their laundering. And when the coppers finally caught up, they faced a network so slick, so deep, it took years to peel back the layers. This is the tale of two men who turned the jewelry district into their playground, stretched their reign from 2012 to a crushing 38-year sentence in 2025, and left a legacy that still echoes through the underworld. Matthew Byrne had come from Sevenoaks, Kent, a sleepy town of manicured lawns and Sunday roasts, where you'd have pictured golf clubs and tweed jackets, not gold bars stacked with drug money. Born around 1981, he wasn't your typical tracksuit gangster. He had a sharp mind, a quiet menace, the kind of bloke who'd sip a pint in a pub while plotting a £1 million score in his head. Bo Devlin, born in 1992, had grown up worlds away in East London's grimy sprawl. Tower blocks, flickering streetlights, and the buzz of trouble in the air. Just raw ambition and a burning hunger for the life that legit work could never deliver. They craved the fast lane, the cash stacks. Exactly when their paths had crossed was lost in the haze, maybe a dodgy deal in a smoky backroom boozer off the old Kent road, maybe a whispered intro through a mutual runner with a rap sheet longer than the Thames. But by 2012, the wheels had started spinning, and they weren't messing about. They had hooked up with South American cocaine wholesalers, big players from Colombia and Ecuador, men who moved mountains of powder across oceans. They had tapped into the encrypted world of EncroChat, a once digital fortress for crooks, and laid the groundwork for a smuggling ring that'd make your head spin. In the Encro world, Byrne called himself Slick Valley and Official Cleaner, while Devlin was called Scalp Cleaner, a moniker that hinted at his ruthless edge. These weren't just aliases, they were a middle finger to the law, a promise of what was to come. In 2012, London had buzzed with Olympics fever. The city was draped in Union Jacks and gold medals. But Byrne and Devlin were plotting something far darker, far bigger. Over the next 8 years, they exchanged messages about smuggling an estimated 5 to 10 tons of cocaine. Class A gear ripped straight from the jungles of South America to the ports of Europe. Not ounces, not kilos, tons. That was the scale they had dealt in, a staggering ambition that dwarfed the petty hustles of street corner dealers. They weren't small-time, they were architects of a cross-continental cartel, a grinder powered by fast cash and hard edges. The operation had clicked tighter than a loaded clip. They had hidden shipments in banana consignments, yellow fruit masking the white powder that would flood their pockets with black market gold. They had set up fake companies, paper fronts with letterheads and VAT numbers, to dodge the taxman and the coppers sniffing around the docks. Dummy runs had been their testing ground. Byrne had ordered Devlin to burn pallets of bananas they couldn't flog legit, torching the evidence. That cost them £300,000 alone. It wasn't just about moving gear, it was about perfecting the art of evasion, making sure every route, every dodge was watertight. They had rigged plug cars, rides with hidden compartments, secret cavities carved out by a shadowy figure known only as the plug boss. These weren't your average motors. They were rolling safes, built to smuggle drugs and cash past border checks and motorway patrols. Lorry drivers had gotten £50,000 a pop to haul 250 kilos across borders. Big men in big rigs, risking it all for a fat stack of notes. But Byrne had been too stingy to cover their diesel. "Let 'em pay their own fuel," he'd messaged. This was pure gangster logic that left no room for sentiment. One deal had stood out like a beacon. £3 million for 600 kilos of coke, a brick of raw, uncut power that'd fetch a fortune once cut and peddled on UK streets. EncroChat messages had revealed the scale. £3 million was just one load, a drop in the ocean of their 8-year spree. They had linked to wholesalers in Colombia and Ecuador. These were the big dogs who ran the supply chain from coca fields to cargo ships. An image Byrne had received showed lorries stopped at the Ecuador-Colombia border. A tense snapshot of the risks they danced with. Customs checks, armed guards, the constant threat of a bust. They had run things through EncroChat, thinking they were untouchable. Their chats bouncing between Antwerp, Rotterdam, and UK ports. Messages had pinged back and forth, routes mapped out, dummy loads planned, cash drops arranged. They had detailed knowledge of smuggling routes, methods honed over years, contacts stretching from South America to the back streets of London. Byrne hadn't just been about the powder. He had a taste for steel, a sideline that added a lethal edge to his game. He had traded banned weapons, Mach 11 submachine guns, compact, rapid-fire killers that could turn a turf war into a bloodbath in seconds. He sent images of firearms and silencers to criminal contacts, flexing his deadly wares like a salesman with a twisted pitch. He chatted with Jody Hall, a 51-year-old gunrunner from Carter's Hill Close in Bromley, who used the handle Unbeaten Moose on EncroChat. Byrne had a third wheel, a shadowy figure dubbed the Boxer, who'd inspect the pieces. He would run his hands over barrels and check the triggers, making sure they were worth the investment. Hall had been in deep. When in July 2020, he was nabbed picking up a shooter Byrne had flogged through a middleman, one the Boxer had vetted. The coppers had swooped in, cuffs had snapped on, and Hall was gone for 12 years before the summer was out. But Byrne was unfazed, his mind already spinning new plays. He had been on EncroChat, plotting a prison van breakout. "I'm gonna see if he wants us to get him off the van, mate. I've a few bods who'll do it and done it before," he had typed, a cold mix of loyalty and reckless bravado. Further messages detailed how he knew the type of coppers involved, plainclothes or uniform, NCA or local plod. And he had still schemed to spring Hall, talking about the logistics like it was a bank job. While the coke had rolled in, the cash had piled up, hundreds of thousands dirty and hot, burning holes in their pockets. Enter Chris O'Shea, 56, a jeweller from Avery Hill Road, New Eltham, running a shop in Hatton Garden, London's Diamond District. His handle was All-Star Gin on EncroChat. He had been the clean-up man, the linchpin in their laundering game. Byrne and Devlin had funneled their profits through his store. Cash swapped for gold bars, designer watches, crisp £20 notes that smelled of fresh ink. Byrne had splashed £40,000 a pop on 10 to 15 gold bars, stacking wealth like a pirate hoarding treasure. Photos of those gleaming bars later found on his phone, a digital trophy cabinet of his ill-gotten gains. Devlin had been the mule, ferrying cash and gold to and from O'Shea. He once demanded £100,000 in fresh notes, slipping O'Shea a 3% cut for the trouble. £3,000 commission for the smooth-talking jeweler who knew how to keep his mouth shut. This hadn't been pocket change. It had been a laundering empire, a masterpiece of financial sleight of hand. O'Shea's store had become their washing machine, spinning drug money into assets that looked legit. Gold bars you could hold, watches you could flash, cash you could spend without a second glance. Investigators later clocked hundreds of thousands pouring through, a river of dirty money flowing from the streets to the jewelry district. Byrne lived large. He had a house built next to his folks' place in Sevenoaks, rolled up in a brand new Jag that purred like a panther. He dreamed of Portuguese villas with leaflets found scattered at his girlfriend's pad. Devlin had dripped in designer gear, shoes, clothes, jewelry. It all screamed money, £5,000 cash stashed at his wheeled road pad in Sevenoaks, alongside CS spray and a surveillance bug detector that hinted at his paranoia. Spring 2020, the world had locked down, streets were empty, shops were shuttered, the hum of normal life silenced by a global plague. But Byrne and Devlin had been in overdrive. The chaos was a perfect cover for their boldest move yet. They had pushed to smuggle 5 tons of coke through European ports like Antwerp and into the UK between March and June, though some reports had pinned it tighter to May or June. Banana crates had been loaded onto ships, plug cars had rolled through back roads. Drivers had banked their £50,000 cuts in crumpled notes. EncroChat had buzzed like a beehive. Byrne had barked orders. Devlin had been on the ground. The network was alive with the tension of a heist in motion. They had thought they were invincible, their encrypted chats a shield against the world. Messages had flown, routes through Antwerp, dummy loads to throw off the scent, cash drops in quiet laybys. They had been across every stage of the drugs journey from South America, contacts with wholesalers, shipping lanes mapped out, ports picked for their lax checks. But the clock had been ticking, and they hadn't heard it. June 2020, the NCA and Europol had cracked EncroChat wide open. Operation Venetic had kicked off, a law enforcement sledgehammer that smashed their digital fortress to bits. Every message, every plan, every dirty secret had spilled out. The £3 million deals, the gun chats, the gold swaps. The coppers had read it all, piecing together a puzzle that stretched from South American jungles to London's streets. Byrne and Devlin didn't know it yet, but the walls were closing in, their empire teetering on the edge while they still dreamed of millions. In July 2020, the heat had risen, the summer sun beating down on a world still reeling. Jody Hall had been nabbed collecting that firearm. One Byrne had sold through a middleman, vetted by the boxer. Byrne had been rattled, but not broken. His mind had churned, his fingers had danced over EncroChat, plotting that prison van breakout. It had been a gamble, a wild swing at keeping his network alive. But it was too late. The NCA had eyes everywhere, phones tapped, messages logged, dots connected from Bromley to Sevenoaks. Hall was down, the first domino to tip, and the cracks had started to show. October 2020, autumn had bitten hard, leaves falling, winds howling, and the Organised Crime Partnership, a joint NCA and Met Police unit, had moved in like wolves on a wounded stag. Byrne had been at his Sevenoaks pad when the door had caved in, the crash of boots on wood echoing through the quiet street. Coppers had torn through, £20,000 cash stuffed in a bedside drawer. Bank slips showing fat stacks in accounts that shouldn't have existed, an EncroChat phone blinking with guilt, and designer clobber piled high like a king's wardrobe. They had clocked a half-built house next door, drug money poured into bricks and mortar, a monument to his arrogance. His girlfriend's place was next. An expensive reinforced door had been smashed open, leaflets for villas in Portugal scattered among Louis Vuitton bags and Gucci threads, signs they had been plotting an escape to sunnier shores. The raid on his parents' crib had yielded a taser and papers with Devlin's name. Devlin's wheeled road spot in Sevenoaks had been hit too. Weapons and anti-surveillance equipment were found, as well as huge bundles of cash. He had a wardrobe dripping with designer goods. The raids had been surgical, ruthless, a coordinated strike that left no corner unturned. They had been cuffed, dragged out into the cold October air. The empire had crumbled beneath their feet. Operation Venetic had paid off. The EncroChat bust in June handed the law a gold mine, a treasure trove of evidence that mapped their every move. Now it was game over, or so the coppers thought. Fast forward to January 2024, the world had turned, the seasons had shifted, and Chris O'Shea had stood in the dock at Maidstone Crown Court. The Hatton Garden jeweller, 56 from Avery Hill Road, New Eltham, pleaded guilty to money laundering and drug offences. 11 years had slammed down, a sentence that echoed through the jewellery district. His gold bars and watches couldn't save him this time. The laundering lifeline had been cut, the artery that fed Byrne and Devlin's cash machine severed. The NCA had peeled back layers, exposing the glitzy front for what it was, a washing machine for drug money. O'Shea had been the third pillar to fall, and the net had tightened around the big fish. On January 9, 2025, Maidstone Crown Court had buzzed with tension, the air thick with anticipation. Byrne and Devlin had stepped up, heads high but hands tied, their swagger muted by the weight of what was coming. They had pleaded guilty, drugs, money laundering, the lot, laid bare before the judge. Byrne's firearms charges had been left on file, a dangling threat, a reminder of the chaos he could have unleashed with those Mac 11s. The evidence had been ironclad, EncroChat logs spilling their secrets, seized cash stacks, gold bars with their fingerprints all over them, photos from Byrne's phone tying him to the loot. They had had no moves left, no cards to play. The gallery was packed, reporters, coppers, maybe a few old mates from the underworld. And the air crackled with the promise of justice. 38 years were about to drop, and they knew it. Sentencing took place on March 7, 2025. The courtroom was full of tension. Matthew Byrne, 44, had stood tall, his Sevenoaks cool cracking under the judge's glare. 21 years and 6 months had crashed down like a sledgehammer. A sentence for drug smuggling, money laundering, and the gun-running sideline that had marked him as a threat. Bo Devlin was next. 17 years square on the chin. His East London grit couldn't dodge that. 38 years total, a lifetime behind bars, and the Hatton Garden cocaine kings had been dethroned. Andrew Tickner, NCA operations manager from the OCP, had stepped up with words that cut through the silence. Matthew Byrne and Bo Devlin were at the pinnacle of this highly sophisticated and organized criminal group. They were responsible for flooding the UK's streets with enormous quantities of cocaine via their contacts for onward sale, laundering the profits via gold and expensive watches. They were across every stage of the drugs journey from South America, going to the trouble of organizing dummy runs in an attempt to trick law enforcement into believing that they were running a legitimate business. Although Byrne's firearms venture would have made him a useful contact to those in the criminal underworld, it's chilling to think about the violence and intimidation these weapons would have unleashed. Tickner also added, We continue to work with partners at home and abroad to target organized criminals who pose the greatest risk to the UK by being at the forefront of the Class A drugs and firearms supply chain. The dust had settled, the courtroom echoes had faded. Byrne and Devlin had been locked away, 21 and 17 years stretched ahead like an endless road, no parole in sight. From Sevenoaks to East London, Hatton Garden to Antwerp, they had left a trail. 190 million in cocaine, a laundering empire in ruins, and a fortune snatched by the NCA. They had lived the life, fast cars, gold stacks glinting in safes, and Portuguese villa dreams tucked into designer drawers, but it had come at a price. They hadn't just played the game, they had owned it for a while. Smuggling tons of coke, trading Mac 11s with silencers, and washing cash through the jewelry district. It had been a gangster's paradise, a symphony of crime played out over 8 years. OCP had been their nemesis, working to stop the flow of drugs to London's criminal market, targeting upstream crooks and overseas contacts. Operation Venetic had flipped the script, the EncroChat takedown in June 2020, the key that unlocked their downfall. The bars had slammed shut, but their names still lingered, a cautionary tale of rise and fall, a defiance that burned bright, until it finally burned out. For more raw and real crime stories, hit the like button and subscribe. Until the next episode, stay alert and stay safe.